Oi oi, it's your boy Hawker, back with the quarantine hair, and more importantly back with another video, this time talking about the recent coaching changes and who will be the biggest winners and losers. So in case you missed it, in the upcoming online Road to Rio tournament, which is one of the main ways to try and qualify for the major, it was recently announced that coaches will be able to join the game server and talk to the players throughout the matches. So obviously this can have some big implications. So I'm going to talk about which teams I think benefit from this, which teams I think are going to be harmed by this, and which teams I'm kind of indifferent on, and I could see it going either way. So let's not waste any more time, let's jump into it. The first team I see benefiting from this change is going to be Ninjas in Pajamas. NiP have Threat as their coach, who had success in 2016 before the original coaching rule change came into place. Most notably, NiP managed to win Malmo over Navi, who were technically the #1 ranked team in the world at the time, and they also did pretty well at Pro League, where they only lost against Luminosity, who went on to win that tournament. Oh, and by the way, 2016 was so long ago at this point that Exist won the MVP for that Malmo tournament, so that gives you an idea of how much things have changed. They also had good online results in this period, which were quite largely attributed to Threat helping the team tactically. And considering I see NiP as a team right now who lack a really proven in-game leader, I think this will definitely help them if Threat decides to make some calls. I also think someone like Nork's game could improve from this, having a more established and well-known in-game leader leading this roster. Because in my analysis of him, I noted that he seems like a pretty smart player, but he had some rounds where the in-game leading issues were kind of causing him to be in spots that I don't think he really thrived. So overall, this kind of feels like a slam dunk for NiP, because Threat has already been proven to be successful as a coach who makes in-game calls based on that 2016 period, and it might free up guys like Lekro to do more fragging, which would be great for this NiP squad. Second team I'd like to talk about is FaZe Clan. I think they're going to gain from this change. So Yanko obviously didn't coach back in 2016, but his work on the desk, coupled with FaZe's lack of a natural in-game leader, should make this a pretty obvious choice. I think this is especially true with Nico being back to an outstanding level recently, and Yanko seemingly having a close relationship with Nico. That could really help in Yanko now making some of the calls, considering he knows what Nico probably wants to do, and if Nico can just focus on solely fragging, I would be scared of him if I were any team right now. The dude's a monster. And again, Yanko's someone who's had experience playing on teams at the past, albeit teams at a lower level than this, but I still think he'll have no problem making calls if FaZe decide to let him make the calls. And to be honest, with FaZe not having that natural in-game leader, they don't have anyone who naturally fits that role, I think they'd be silly not to let Yanko make some of these calls and alleviate some of the pressure on Nico being that star fragger and caller. The third team I want to highlight who should probably gain from this are going to be ENCE. Twister is another coach who didn't coach back when the in-game leader rule was changed for coaches. But just in general, I think it's obvious ENCE have a bit of an in-game leader crisis right now. They're trying to switch to Sunny as an IGL. I mean, the just having fun meme was clearly blown out of proportion, because if you've watched those ENCE documentaries, you know they're having anything but fun right now. They're so depressing to watch. But something else you would have noticed from those ENCE documentaries is that Twister definitely comes across as a strong leadership figure, as a coach and someone that they respect. And even though I'm not entirely sure what his in-game calling ability will be, he's got experience and history on some Finnish teams, and just having him there to help Sunny transition into making calls will be valuable. I think some players underestimate how difficult it is to have a plan for every round when you're an in-game leader. So if Sunny maybe doesn't have an idea for a round, or if he's just in general struggling to develop his IGL skill, which is to be expected as he's transitioning to this role, Twister can be there to maybe help him make some calls, which will be super handy. And then the obvious other upside is that Alu not having to IGL anymore might give him more of an ability to pop off, which should always be a win condition for this ENCE team to some extent. When Alu has a good game, he can make calls for himself, and he can definitely win you games. Now let's move on to the teams I'm not entirely sure about. I'm kind of 50-50 on whether it will help them or not. So this first one might surprise you a bit. I've put Navi in the question mark category with their coach Blade. Blade is obviously very well respected in the CIS scene as the former in-game leader of Flipside, but a point that Moses brought up on Counterpoints was that Blade's calling style when he played doesn't seem to be too conducive with this current Navi lineup. On the flip side, Blade had this very disciplined squad that he would love to call these intricate executes around, oftentimes late in the round. And I think the big question here is, does Blade just think that Counter-Strike should always be played like that? Or was he just trying to make the most of the lack of skill he had on his team at that time? I generally think I lean towards the latter of those two. I think Blade was probably just trying to make the best of what he had by making strats that would kind of make up for the fact that he didn't have very skilled players. And if that's the case, I think he could certainly help out making some calls here and there. When he joined Navi, he said he wants the team to understand the game on the same level, and to reach that, they want to discuss and analyze games together. He also says here that at this bootcamp, they started to implement defaults and they started to kind of work on fundamentals to make a system rather than focusing on executes, which I think is good, because if you run very specific executes, very well drilled executes, I don't think you make the most of this Navi team. So again, that gives me the vibe that he wants everyone to be on the same page, but he's not going to force them to play that execute heavy style. So I'd lean towards this one probably helping Navi, but considering they're going to be playing only against CIS teams in this Road to Rio thing and not the top tier European competition, Blade may not need to contribute much anyway for Navi to find success. So we might not ever get to know how this one affects them. The next question mark I have is Liquid. We've got another former player and in-game leader as a coach in Adren. On paper, Adren has experience as an IGL, which you would think would be able to translate into an ability to help make those in-game calls. But he's never come across as a really assertive figure on this Liquid roster. So even if he has ideas, I'm not sure he'll be able to communicate them effectively. Another thing to think about with this Liquid squad is, from what I've heard in the scene, especially from Thorin, who had the chance to listen in on the teams at Blast, Liquid were one of the teams that had the most cluttered comms in the scene. So if your communication is already very hectic and very frantic, having Adren come in and try and make some calls and try and help the team could actually be a hindrance at some points if the team are already talking too much. Overall though, I'd probably expect minimal changes here, as I think the most likely outcome will be that Adren won't be too vocal in the game, so I wouldn't expect anything massively to change for Liquid. The final team I'm a bit unsure about is going to be Godsent, who have Devilwalk as their coach. Now, Devilwalk comes across as an assertive coach, and he's also a former player and in-game leader, which all sounds good. But you already have Crystal, who is very experienced as an IGL, and I don't know if he's going to be too willing to let Devilwalk help out all that much. I definitely could see Devilwalk help by perhaps giving Crystal some information on their opponent's tendencies, which could then maybe help Crystal make an in-game call. Or even Devilwalk could be capable of making calls himself, which in theory would allow Crystal to prioritize his individual game more. And in general in Counter-Strike, having someone else to help pitch in with ideas is nice, but I don't know if Crystal needs this. He's normally an in-game leader who always seems to have good ideas to me. I think the vibe I get from this Godsent team is that they're either just going to stick with Crystal calling, not to complicate things, which I think Crystal would probably prefer, or maybe we could see Devilwalk trying to make the calls, which could end up being a problem because, like I was saying earlier, he comes across as quite an assertive coach and he may end up overstepping and confusing the comms of the team if he's not careful. So I think Godsent need to make sure they kind of get on the same page with this one. That's the most important thing for them here. Now let's transition into talking about the losers, and there are some obvious ones here. Basically, any team that doesn't have a coach is going to lose relative to the other teams that could gain from coaches making in-game calls. So this applies for teams like MIBR, who don't have a real coach right now. They've just got Dead, their manager, trying to stand in and help out. And then there are teams like Heretics, Bad News Bears, Triumph, and Auglis, who have literally no coach, so nothing to gain. But then the final team I'm throwing into this category is going to be Evil Geniuses, and this one might surprise you. They've recently brought Zeus in to coach, who is definitely a good pickup for this team. But from what I hear about Stan, he's an in-game leader who generally, historically, has been known to make good mid-round calls, and Zeus probably hasn't had enough time to really fit into this team. Stan in the past also hasn't worked too well with coaches, and while he did address this in a recent interview and his attitude seems to have changed for the better, he seems to be much more open to hearing out coaches now, I still feel like Stan is the kind of in-game leader who's going to want to make those calls in-game. I think he's the kind of guy that feels as though the in-game leader's job is to make those calls in-game. So that could definitely lead to Zeus just not speaking up, especially because he's not going to be too familiar with the team. And even if Zeus does try and help out, like I was saying, he might not be too familiar with how EG want to play on some maps. He might not be too familiar with EG in general, and it could just end up causing more friction with Stand, which I think is the worst thing that could happen. They need that relationship to be good there. So those are the teams I wanted to talk about. Let me guys know if you think I missed anyone or if I got any of these teams wrong in terms of whether the coaching thing will change or help them. Also remember that by the time we get to the major, the coaches aren't going to be able to help out again. So this will be quite an interesting time in Counter-Strike to see if any of the teams get a big boost or a big negative effect from this change. And other than that, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time.